without the least modesty or self-restraint. She was no longer Margarita, she was Carmen. She was applauded all the more, and her duet with Faust seemed only to bring her a new success, when suddenly a terrible thing happened. Faust had knelt on one knee. "Let me gaze on the form before me, while some yonder ether blue. Look now, the star of eve, bright and tender, lingers o'er me, to love thy beauty too." And Margarita replied, how strange, like a spell does the evening bind me, and a deep languid charm I feel without alarm, with its melody entwined me, and all my heart subdue. At that moment, at that identical moment, the terrible thing happened. Carlotta croaked like a toad. There was consternation on Carlotta's face, and consternation on the faces of all the audience. The two managers in their boxes could not suppress an exclamation of horror. Everyone felt that the thing was not natural, that there was witchcraft behind it. That toad smelt of brimstone. Poor wretched, despairing, crushed Carlotta. The uproar in the house was indescribable. If the thing had happened to anyone but Carlotta, she would have been hooted. But everyone knew how perfect an instrument her voice was, and there was no display of anger, but only of horror and dismay, the sort of dismay which men would have felt if they had witnessed the catastrophe that broke the arms of the Venus de Milo. And even then they would have seen and understood. But here this toad was incomprehensible, so much so after some seconds spent in asking herself if she had really heard that note, that sound, that infernal noise issue from her throat. She tried to persuade herself that it was not so, but she was the victim of an illusion of the air and not of treachery on the part of her voice. Meanwhile, in box 5, Montreman and Richard had turned very pale. This extraordinary and inexplicable incident filled them with a dread which was the more awful inasmuch as for some little time they had been within the direct influence of the ghost. They had felt his breath. Montreman's hair stood on end. Richard wiped the perspiration from his forehead. Yes, the ghost was there, around them, behind them, beside them. They felt his presence without seeing him. They heard his breath, close, close, close to them. They were sure that there were 3 people in the box. They trembled. They thought of running away. They dared not. They dared not make a movement or exchange a word which might have told the ghost that they knew that he was there. What was going to happen? This happened. Their joint exclamation of horror was heard all over the house. They felt that they were smarting under the ghost's attack. Leaning over the ledge of their box, they stared at Carlotta as though they did not recognize her. That infernal girl with her must have given the signal for some catastrophe. They were waiting for the catastrophe. The ghost had told them it would come. The house had a curse upon it. The 2 managers gasped and panted under the weight of the catastrophe. Richard was heard calling to Carlotta in a smothered voice, "Well, go on!" No, Carlotta did not go on. Bravely, heroically, she started afresh on the fatal line at the end which the toad had appeared. An awful silence succeeded the uproar. Again, Carlotta's voice alone filled the resounding house. "I feel without alarm." The audience felt also, but not without alarm. "I feel without alarm, with its melody enwind me, with all my heart The toad also had started afresh. The house broke into a wild tumult. The two managers collapsed in their chairs and dared not even turn around. They had not the strength. The ghost was chuckling behind their backs, and at last they distinctly heard his voice in their right ears, the impossible voice, the mouthless voice, saying, "She is singing tonight to bring the chandelier down." With one accord they raised their eyes to the ceiling and uttered a terrible cry. The chandelier, the immense mass of the chandelier, was slipping down, coming towards them at the call of that fiendish voice. Released from its hook, it plunged from the ceiling and came smashing into the middle of the stalls amid 1,000 shouts of terror. A wild rush for the doors followed. The papers of the day state that there were numbers wounded and one killed. The chandelier had crashed down upon the head of the wretched woman who had come to the opera for the first time in her life, the woman whom Monsieur Richard had appointed to succeed Mame Giry, the ghost's box-keeper, in her functions. She was killed on the spot, and the next morning a newspaper appeared with this headline: 200,000 kilos on the head of a concierge. That was her sole epitaph. Oh goodness, it looks like the stream might have dropped in the middle of that. I apologize. Chapter 8. The Mysterious Brahmin. The tragic evening was a bad one for all concerned. Carlotta fell ill. As for Christine Daae, she disappeared after the performance. A fortnight elapsed, during which she was neither seen at the opera nor outside of the opera. Raoul, of course, was the first to be astonished at the young diva's absence. He wrote to her at Madame Valerius's flat and received no reply. His grief increased, and he ended by being seriously alarmed at never seeing her name on the program. Faust was played without her. One evening he went to the manager's office to ask the reason of Christine's disappearance. He found both of them looking extremely worried. Their own friends did not recognize them. They had lost all their gaiety and spirits. They were seen crossing the stage with hanging heads, careworn brows, pale cheeks, as though pursued by some abominable thought of the sport of some persistent fate. The fall of the chandelier had involved them in no little responsibility, but it was difficult to make them speak of it. The inquest had ended in a verdict of accidental death, caused by the wear and tear of the chains with which the chandelier had hung from the ceiling. But it was the duty of both the old and the new managers to discover this wear and tear and have it remedied in time. And I feel bound to say that Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin were at this time appeared so changed, so absent-minded, so mysterious, so incomprehensible, that many of the subscribers thought that some event even more horrible than the fall of the chandelier must have affected their state of mind. In their daily intercourse they showed themselves very impatient, except with Mame Giry, whom had been reinstated in their functions, and their reception of the Vicomte de Chagny, when he came to ask about Christine, was anything but cordial. They merely told him that she was taking a holiday. He asked how long the holiday was for, and they replied curtly that it was for an unlimited period, as Mademoiselle Daae had requested leave of absence for reasons of health. "Then she is ill," he cried. "What is the matter with her?" "We don't know." "Didn't you send the doctor of the opera to see her?" "No, she did not ask for him, and, as we trust her, we took her word." Raoul left the building a prey to the gloomiest thoughts. He resolved, come what might, to go and inquire at Mamma Valerius. He remembered the strong phrases in Christine's letter forbidding him to make any attempt to see her. But what he had seen at Perros, what he had heard behind the dressing-room door, his conversation with Christine at the edge of the moor, made him suspect some machination which, devilish though it might be, was none the less human. The girl's highly strung imagination, her affectionate and credulous mind, the primitive education which had surrounded her childhood with a circle of legend, the constant brooding over her dead father, and above all, the state of sublime ecstasy into which music threw her from the moment that this art was made manifest to her under exceptional conditions, as in the churchyard at Perros. All this seemed to him to constitute a moral ground only too favorable for the malevolent designs of some mysterious and unscrupulous person. Of whom was Christine Daae the victim? This was the very sensible question which Raoul put to himself as he hurried off to Mamma Valerius's. He trembled as he rang at a little flat in the Rue Notre-Dame des Victoires. The door was opened by the maid whom he had seen coming out of Christine's dressing-room one evening. He asked if he could speak to Madame Valerius, and was told that she was ill in bed and was not receiving visitors. "Take my card, please," he said. The maid soon returned, and showed him into the small and scantily furnished drawing-room, in which portraits of Professor Valerius and old Daae faced each other on the walls. "Madame begs Monsieur le Vicomte to excuse her," said the servant. "She can only see him in her bedroom. The poor lady has lost the use of her legs." 5 minutes later, Raoul was ushered into an ill-lit room, where he recognized the good, kind face of Christine's benefactress in the semi-darkness of an alcove. Mamma Valerius's hair was quite white now, but her eyes had grown no older. Never, indeed, had their expression been so bright, so pure, so childlike. "Monsieur de Chagny," she cried gaily, putting out both her hands to her visitor. "Ah, it's heaven that sends you here. We can talk of her." This last sentence sounded very gloomy in the young man's ears. He at once asked, "Madame, where is Christine?" And the old lady replied calmly, "She is with her good genius." "What good genius?" exclaimed poor Raoul. "Why, the angel of music." The Vicomte dropped into a chair. Really? Christine was with the angel of music? And there lay Mamma Valerius in bed, smiling at him and putting her fingers to her lips to warn him to be silent. And she added, "You must not tell anybody." "You can rely on me," said Raoul. He hardly knew what he was saying, for his ideas about Christine, already greatly confused, were becoming more and more tangled, and it seemed as if everything was beginning to turn around him, around the room, around that extraordinary good lady with the white hair and the forget-me-not eyes. I know I can," she said with a happy laugh. "But why don't you come near me as you used to when you were a little boy? Give me your hands, as when you brought me the story of little Lottie, which Daddy Daae had told you. I'm very fond of you, Monsieur Raoul, you know, and so is Christine very fond of you." "She is fond of me?" sighed the young man. He found a difficulty in collecting his thoughts and bringing them to bear on Mamma Valerius. Good genius, on the angel of music of which Christine had spoken to him so strangely, on the death's head which he had seen in a sort of nightmare on the high altar at Perros, and also on the opera ghost, whose fame had come to his ears one evening when he was standing behind the scene within hearing of a group of the scene-shifters who were repeating the ghastly description which the hanged man, Joseph Bouquet, had given of the ghost before his mysterious death. He asked in a low voice, "What makes you think that Christine is fond of me, madame? She used to speak of you every day." "Really? And what did she tell you?" "She told me that you had made her a proposal." And the good old lady began laughing wholeheartedly. Raoul sprang from his chair, flushed to the temples, suffering agonies. What's this? Where are you going? Sit down again at once, will you? Do you think I will let you go like that? If you're angry with me for laughing, I beg your pardon. After all, what has happened isn't your fault. Didn't you know? Did you think that Christine was free? Is Christine engaged to be married? Asked the wretched Raoul in a choking voice. Why, no. You know as well as I do that Christine couldn't marry even if she wanted to. But I don't know anything about it, and why can't Christine marry? Because of the Angel of Music, of course. I don't follow. Yes, he forbids her to. He forbids her? The Angel of Music forbids her to marry? Oh, he forbids her without forbidding her. It's like this. You tell her that if she got... he tells her that if she got married, she would never hear him again. That's all. And that he would go away forever. So you understand, she can't let the Angel of Music go. It's quite natural. Yes, echoed Raoul submissively. It's quite natural. Besides, I thought Christine had told you all that when she met you at Perros, where she went with her good genius. Oh, she went to Perros with her good genius, did she? That is to say, he arranged to meet her down there at the churchyard at Perros, by Daae's grave. He promised to play her the resurrection of Lazarus on her father's violin. Raoul de Chagny rose and, with a very masterful air, pronounced his peremptory words. Madame, you have the goodness to tell me where that genius lives. The old lady did not seem surprised at this indiscreet command. She raised her eyes and said, In heaven. Such simplicity baffled him. He did not know what to say in the presence of this candid and perfect faith in a genius who came down nightly from heaven to haunt the dressing rooms at the opera. He now realized the possible state of mind of a girl brought up between a superstitious fiddler and a visionary old woman, and he shrugged when he thought of the consequences of it all. Is Christine still good? He asked, suddenly in spite of everything. I swear it, as I hope to be saved, exclaimed the old woman, who, this time, seemed incensed. And if you doubt it, sir, I don't know what you are here for. Raoul tore at his gloves. How long has she known this genius? About 3 months? Yes, it's quite 3 months since he began to give her lessons. The Vicomte threw up his arms with a gesture of despair. The genius gives her lessons! And where, pray? Now that she has gone away with him, I can't say, but up to a fortnight ago it was in Christine's dressing room. It would be impossible in this little flat. The whole house would hear him. Whereas at the opera at 8 o'clock in the morning there is no one about, you see. Yes, I see, cried the Vicomte, and he hurriedly took leave of Madame Valerius, who asked herself if the young nobleman was not a little off in his head. He walked home to his brother's house in a pitiful state. He could have struck himself, banged his head against the walls, to think that he had believed in her innocence, in her purity, the Angel of Music. He knew him now. He saw him. It was no doubt some frightful tenor, a good-looking popinjay, who mouthed and simpered as he sang. He thought himself as absurd and wretched as could be. Oh, what a miserable little insignificant, silly young man was Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny, thought Raoul furiously. And she, what a bold and damnably sly creature! His brother was waiting for him, and Raoul fell into his arms like a child. The Count consoled him, without asking for explanations, and Raoul certainly would have hesitated before telling him the story of the Angel of Music. His brother suggested taking him out to dinner. Overcome as he was with despair, Raoul would probably have refused any invitation that evening if the Count had not, as an inducement, told him that the lady of his thoughts had been seen the night before in the company of someone of the other sex in the Bois. At first the Vicomte refused to believe it, but he received such exact details that he ceased protesting. She had been seen, it appeared, driving in a Brahmin with the windows down. She seemed to be slowly breathing the cold night air. There was a glorious moon shining. She was recognized beyond a doubt. As for her companion, only his shadowy outline was seen, leaning back in the dark. The carriage was going at a walking pace down a lonely drive behind the grandstand at Longchamp. Raoul, dressed in frantic haste, prepared to forget his distress by flinging himself, as people say, into the vortex of pleasure. Alas, he was but a dull guest, and, leaving his brother early, found himself by 10 o'clock in the evening in a cab behind the Longchamp race course. It was freezing hard. The road lay deserted and very bright under the moonlight. He told the driver to wait for him at the corner of an avenue, and, hiding as best he could, stood stamping his feet to keep warm. He had been indulging in this healthy exercise for half an hour or so, when a carriage turned into the road and came quietly in his direction at a walking pace. As it approached, he saw that a woman was leaning her head from the window, and suddenly the moon shed a pale gleam over her features. Christine! The sacred name of his love had sprung from his heart and his lips. He could not keep it back. He would have given anything to withdraw it, for that name, proclaimed in the stillness of the night, had acted as though it was the preconcerted signal for a furious rush on the part of the whole turnout, which dashed past him before he could put into execution his plan of leaping at the horse's head. The carriage window was raised, and the girl's face had disappeared, and the Brahmin, behind which he was running, was now no more than a black spot on the white road. He called out again, "Christine!" No reply, and he stopped in the midst of the silence. With lackluster eyes he stared down that cold, desolate road and into the pale, dead night. Nothing was colder than his heart. Nothing was half so dead. He had loved an angel, and now he despised a woman. Raoul, how that little fairy of the north had tricked you! Was it really necessary to have so fresh and young a face, a forehead so shy and always ready to cover itself with a pink blush of modesty, in order to pass in the lonely night, in a carriage and pair, accompanied by a mysterious lover? Surely there should be some limit to hypocrisy and lying. She had passed without answering his cry, and he was thinking of dying, and he was 20 years old. His valet found him in the morning sitting on his bed. He had not undressed, and the servant feared, at the sight of his face, that some disaster had occurred. Raoul snatched his letter from the man's hand. He had recognized Christine's paper and handwriting. She said, "Dear, go to the masked ball at the opera on the night after tomorrow. At 12 o'clock, be in the little room behind the chimney-piece of the big crush room. Stand near the door that leads to the rotunda. Don't mention this appointment to a living soul. Wear a white domino, and see that you are well masked. As you love me, do not let yourself be recognized. Christine." Chapter 9. At the Masked Ball. The envelope was covered with mud and unstamped. It bore the words, "To be handed to Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny," followed by this address, in a pencil. It must have been flung out in the hope that a passer-by would find the note and deliver it, which was what happened. The note had been picked up on the pavement at the Place de l'Opéra. Raoul read it over again with fevered eyes. No more was needed to revive his hope. The sombre picture which he had for a moment imagined of Christine forgetting her duty to herself made way for its original concept conception of an unfortunate, innocent child, the victim of imprudence and exaggerated sensibility. To what extent this time was she really a victim? Whose prisoner was she? Into what whirlpool had she been dragged? He asked himself these questions with a cruel anguish, but even this pain seemed endurable behind the frenzy into which he was thrown at the thought of a lying and deceitful Christine. What had happened? What influence had she undergone? What monster had carried her off, and by what means? By what means, indeed, but that of music? He knew Christine's story. After her father's death, she acquired a distaste for everything in life, including her art. She went through the conservatoire like a poor, soulless singing machine, and suddenly she awoke as though through the intervention of a god. The angel of music appeared upon the scene. She sang Margarita and Faust and triumphed. The angel of music. For 3 months the angel of music had been giving Christine lessons. He was a punctilious singing master, and now he was taking her for drives in the bois. Raoul's fingers clutched at his flesh above his jealous heart. In this inexperience, he now asked himself with terror what game the girl was playing. Up to that point, could an opera singer make a fool of a fond young man quite new to love? Oh, misery! Thus did Raoul's thoughts fly from one extreme to the other. He no longer knew whether to pity Christine or curse her, and he pitied and cursed her turn and turn about. At all events, he brought a white domino. The hour of the appointment came at last, with his face in a mask trimmed with long, thick lace, looking a very Pierrot in his white wrap. The Vicomte thought himself most ridiculous. Men of the world do not go to the opera ball in fancy dress. It was laughable. One's thought, however, consoled the Vicomte. He would certainly never be recognized. This ball was an exceptional affair, given some time before Shrovetide, in honor of the anniversary of the birth of a famous draftsman. Excuse me. And it was expected to be much gayer, noisier, more bohemian than the ordinary masked ball. Numbers of artists had arranged to go, accompanied by a whole cohort of models and pupils who, by midnight, began to create a tremendous din. Raoul arrived at 5 minutes to 12, did not linger to look at the motley dresses displayed all the way up to the marble staircase, one of the richest settings in the world, allowed no facetious mask to draw him into a contest of wits, replied to no jests, and shook off the bold familiarity of a number of couples who had already become a trifle too gay. Crossing the big crush room and escaping from a mad whirl of dancers in which he was momentarily caught, he at last entered the room mentioned in Christine's letter. He found it crammed, for this small space was the point where all those who were going to supper in the rotunda met those who were returning from taking a glass of champagne, and the fun here waxed fast and furious. Raoul leant against a doorpost and waited. He did not wait long. A black domino passed and gave a quick squeeze to the tips of his fingers. He understood that it was she, and followed her. "Is that you, Christine?" he asked between his teeth. The black domino turned round promptly and raised her finger to her lips, no doubt to warn him not to mention her name again. Raoul continued to follow her in silence. He was afraid of losing her after meeting her again in such strange circumstances. His grudge against her was gone. He was even sure now that she had nothing to reproach herself with, however peculiar and inexplicable her conduct might be. He was ready to make any display of clemency, forgiveness, or cowardice. He was in love, and no doubt he would soon receive a very natural explanation for her curious absence. The black domino turned back from time to time to see if the white domino were still following. As Raoul once more passed through the great crush room, this time in the wake of his guide, he could not help noticing a group crowding round a person whose eccentric air, and cadaverous appearance were causing a sensation. It was a man dressed all in scarlet, with a huge hat and feathers on the top of a wonderful death's head. From his shoulders hung an immense red velvet cloak, which trailed along the floor like a king's train, and on this cloak was embroidered in gold letters, which every one read and repeated aloud, "Touch me not, I am Red Death stalking abroad." Then one, greatly daring, did try to touch him, but a skeleton hand shot out of the crimson sleeve and violently seized the rash one's wrist, and he, feeling the clutch of the knuckle bones, the furious grasp of death, uttered a cry of pain and terror. When Red Death released him at last, he ran away like a madman, pursued by the jeers of the bystanders. It was at this moment that Raoul passed in front of the funereal masquerader, who had just happened to turn in his direction, and he nearly exclaimed, "The death's head of Perrault Guirec!" He had recognized him. He wanted to dart forwards, forgetting Christine, but the black domino, who, also seeing a prey to some strange excitement, caught him by the arm and dragged him from the crush room, far from the mad crowd through which Red Death was stalking. The black domino kept on turning back, and apparently on two occasions saw something that startled her, for she hurried her pace and Raoul's as though they were being pursued. They went up 2 floors. Here the stairs and corridors were almost deserted. The black domino opened the door of a private box and beckoned to the white domino to follow her. Then Christine, whom he now knew by the sound of her voice, closed the door behind them and warned him in a whisper to remain at the back of the box and on no account to show himself. Raoul took off his mask. Christine kept on hers, and when Raoul was about to ask her to remove it, he was surprised to see her put her ear to the partition and listen eagerly for a sound outside. Then she opened the door ajar, looked out into the corridor, and in a low voice said, "He must have gone up higher." Suddenly she exclaimed, "He's coming down again!" She tried to close the door, but Raoul prevented her, for he had seen on the top step of the staircase that led to the floor above a red foot, followed by another. And slowly, majestically, the whole scarlet dress of Red Death met his eyes, and he once more saw the death's head of Perrault Guirec. "It's he!" he exclaimed. "It's time! He shall not escape me!" But Christine had slammed the door at a moment when Raoul was on the point of rushing out. He tried to push her aside. "Whom do you mean?" she asked in a changed voice. "Who shall not escape you?" Raoul tried to overcome the girl's resistance by force, but she repelled him with a strength which he would not have suspected in her. He understood, or thought he understood, and at once lost his temper. "Who?" he repeated angrily. "Why, he, the man who hides behind that hideous mask of death, the evil genius of the churchyard at Perrault, Red Death! In a word, madame, your friend, your angel of music. But I shall snatch off his mask, as I shall snatch off my own, and this time we shall look each other in the face, he and I, with no veil and no lies between us, and I shall know whom you love and whom loves you." He burst into a mad laugh, while Christine gave disconsolate moan behind her velvet mask. With a tragic gesture, she flung out her 2 arms, fixing a barrier of white flesh against the door. "In the name of our love, Raoul, you shall not pass!" He stopped. What had she said? In the name of their love? Never before had she confessed that she loved him, and yet she had had opportunities enough. Pooh! Her only object was to gain a few seconds. She wished to give Red Death time to escape, and in accents of childish hatred he said, "You lie, madame, for you do not love me, and you have never loved me. What a poor fellow I must be to let you mock and flout me as you have done. Why did you give me every reason for hope at peril, for honest hope, madame? For I am an honest man, and I believed you to be an honest woman, when your only intention was to deceive me. Alas, you have deceived us all. You have taken a shameful advantage of the candid affection of your benefactress herself, who continues to believe in your sincerity while you go about the opera ball with Red Death. I despise you!" And he burst into tears. She allowed him to insult her. She thought of but one thing, to prevent him from leaving the box. "You will beg my pardon one day for all these ugly words, Raoul, and I shall forgive you." He shook his head. "No, no, you have driven me mad. When I think that I had only one object in life, to give my name to an opera wench. Raoul, how can you? I shall die of shame." "No, dear, live," said Christine in a grave and breaking voice, "and goodbye. Goodbye, Raoul." The boy stepped forward, staggering as he went. He risked one more sarcasm. "Oh, but you must let me come and applaud you from time to time." "I shall never sing again, Raoul." "Really?" he replied, still more satirically. So he is taking you off the stage. I congratulate you." "But we shall meet in the Bois one of these evenings." "Not in the Bois, nor anywhere, Raoul. You shall not see me again." "May one at least ask to what darkness you are returning? For what hell are you leaving, mysterious lady? Or for what paradise?" "I came to tell you, dear, but I cannot tell you now. You would not believe me. You have lost faith in me, Raoul. It is finished." She spoke in such a despairing voice that the lad began to feel remorse for his cruelty. "But look here," he cried, "can't you tell me what all this means? You are free. There is no one to interfere with you. You go about Paris. You put on a domino to come to the ball. Why do you not go home? What have you been doing this past fortnight? What is this tale about the angel of music which you have been telling Mamma Valerius? Someone may have taken you in, played upon your innocence. I was a witness of it myself at peril. But you know what to believe now. You seem to me to be quite sensible, Christine. You know what you are doing, and meanwhile Mamma Valerius lies waiting for you at home, and appealing to your good genius. Explain yourself, Christine, I beg you. Anyone might have been deceived as I was. What is this farce?" Christine simply took off her mask and said, "Dear, it is a tragedy." Raoul now saw her face and could not restrain an exclamation of surprise and terror. The fresh complexion of former days was gone. The mortal pallor covered those features which he had known so charming and so gentle, and sorrow had furrowed them with pitiless lines, and traced dark and unspeakably sad shadows under her eyes. My dearest, he moaned, holding out his arms. "You promised to forgive me, perhaps." "Perhaps some day," she said, resuming her mask, and she went away, forbidding him with a gesture to follow her. He tried to disobey her, but she turned round and repeated her gesture of farewell with such authority that he dared not move a step. He watched her till she was out of sight. Then he also went down among the crowd, hardly knowing what he was doing, with throbbing temples and an aching heart, and as he crossed the dance floor he asked if anybody had seen Red Death. Yes, everyone had seen Red Death, but Raoul could not find him, and at 2 o'clock in the morning he turned down the passage behind the scenes that led to Christine Daae's dressing room. His footsteps took him to that room where he had first known suffering. He tapped at the door. There was no answer. He entered as he had entered when he looked everywhere for the man's voice. The room was empty. A gas jet was burning, turned down low. He saw some letter paper on a little desk. He thought of writing to Christine, but he heard steps in the passage. He had only time to hide in the inner room, which was separated from the dressing room by a curtain. Christine entered, took off her mask with a weary movement, and flung it on the table. She sighed and let her pretty head fall into her two hands. What was she thinking of? Of Raoul? No, for Raoul heard her murmur, "Poor Eric." At first, he thought that he must be mistaken. To begin with, he was persuaded that if anyone was to be pitied, it was he, Raoul. It would have been quite natural if she had said poor Raoul after what had happened between them, but shaking her head, she repeated, "Poor Eric." What had this Eric to do with Christine's sighs, and why was she pitying Eric when Raoul was so unhappy? Christine began to write deliberately, calmly, and so placidly that Raoul, who was still trembling from the effects of the tragedy that separated them, was painfully impressed. What coolness, he said to himself. She wrote on, filling 2, 3, 4 sheets. Suddenly she raised her head and hid the sheets in her bodice. She seemed to be listening. Raoul also listened. Whence came that strange sound, that distant rhythm? A faint singing seemed to issue from the walls. Yes, it was as though the walls themselves were singing. The song became plainer. The words were more distinguishable. He heard a voice, a very beautiful, soft voice, very captivating voice. But for all its softness, it remained a male voice. The voice came nearer and nearer. It came through the walls. It approached, and now the voice was in the room, in front of Christine. Christine rose and addressed the voice, as though speaking to someone beside her. "Here I am, Eric," she said. "I am ready. But you are late." Raoul, peeping from behind the curtain, could not believe his eyes, which showed him nothing. Christine's face lit up. A smile of happiness appeared upon her bloodless lips, a smile like that of sick people when they receive the first hope of recovery. The voice without a body went on singing, and certainly Raoul had never in his life heard anything more absolutely and heroically sweet, more gloriously suggestive, more delicate, more powerful, in short, more irresistibly triumphant. He listened to it in a fever, and he now began to understand how Christine Daae was able to appear one evening before the stupefied audience with accounts of a beauty hitherto unknown, of a superhuman exaltation, while doubtless still under the influence of the mysterious and invisible master. The voice was singing the wedding night song from Romeo and Juliet. Raoul saw Christine stretch her arms to the voice, as she had done in the churchyard at Perros, to the invisible violin playing the resurrection of Lazarus. And nothing could describe the passion with which the voice sang, "Fate links thee to me for ever and a day." The strains went through Raoul's heart, struggling against the charm that seemed to deprive him of all his of all his will and all his energy, and almost all his lucidity at the moment when he needed them most. He succeeded in drawing back the curtain that hid him, and he walked to where Christine stood. She herself was moving to the back of the room, the whole wall of which was occupied by a great mirror that reflected her image, but not his, for he was just behind and entirely covered by her. "Fate links thee to me for ever and a day." Christine walked towards her image in the glass, and the image came towards her. The two Christines, the real one and the reflection, ended by touching, and Raoul put out his arms to clasp the two in one embrace, but by a sort of dazzling miracle that sent him staggering, Raoul was suddenly flung back while an icy blast swept across his face, and he saw not 2, but 4, 8, 20, Christine, spinning round him, laughing at him, and fleeing so swiftly that he could not touch one of them. At last everything stood still again, and he saw himself in the glass, but Christine had disappeared. He rushed up to the glass. He struck at the walls. Nobody. And meanwhile the room still echoed with a distant, passionate singing. Fate links thee to me for ever and a day. Which way? Which way had Christine gone? Which way would she return? Would she return? Alas, had she not declared to him that everything was finished? And was the voice not repeating, Fate links thee to me for ever and a day? To me? To whom? Then, worn out, beaten, empty-brained, he sat down on the chair which Christine had just left. Like her, he had let his head fall into his hands. When he raised it, the tears were streaming down his young cheek, real, heavy tears like those which jealous children shed, tears that wept for a sorrow which was in no way fanciful, but which was common to all the lovers on earth, and which he expressed aloud. Who is this Eric? So as we have reached the end of a chapter, and we have 5 minutes till the set end time of the stream, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Let me really quickly check the schedule. Oh, come on. Hang on a second. The schedule didn't load. Alright, so the next story time is going to be on Tuesday. That is going to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then on Wednesday, the 22nd, we will continue with The Phantom of the Opera. And of course it will be 2 to 4 Pacific time. Yeah. Just, I'll keep you posted on if there are going to be any impromptu game streams. I might do one tonight, and I'm hoping on Tuesday after a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, there is a game that the art was done by one of the people that I went to high school, and he is an amazing artist. He always did the best art in high school and continues to do some amazing art nowadays as well. And it's called Luna, so I'm hoping to possibly play that on Tuesday after that stream. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. I apologize for all of the dropped frames, if it was buffering or anything like that, but I will definitely go ahead and put this stream up on YouTube. Yeah, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good day.